Chapter 3 talks about the growth of public relations and talks about how the industry got started, going back to a surprisingly early time. I think a lot of people think public relations as being a 20th century industry, but as the textbook illustrates, it goes back to ancient Greek times and going back with the history with the Catholic Church. Book also talks about some of the important reasons of why public relations has flourished and has grown over the last decade or so. Examples given include the growth of big institutions, the heightened public awareness and media sophistication of consumers, the increasing incidence of societal change, the growing power of global media, public opinion, and democracy, and the dominance of the internet, which is certainly a prevailing force today. Like I said in the beginning, public relations goes back, its usage of it goes back for quite some time to the ancient Greek times, to the Catholic Church. As far as the early American experience, there are examples of public relations found as given in the book throughout the Revolutionary War. And there was really no definition of, people weren't practicing public relations then. It was just some of the attributes of public relations were being conducted by different organizations, by different politicians, mainly focusing on the power of communications to persuade people to act in a certain way. It wasn't until the 1800s, late 1800s, that we saw actual, perhaps not necessarily ethical, public relations practitioners really starting to formulate. The two examples given in the book, of course, is the infamous P.T. Barnum, who is a master of the spin. Not a lot of PR people today use him as a model, but he is one of the fathers, for better or for worse, of public relations. Amos Kendall is a big one. He was the first public affairs type person for a U.S. president, President Jackson. Serving in the role as as a speechwriter and the media relations person. Where public relations started to become especially important, occurred shortly after the Industrial Revolution, and big-time corporations weren't necessarily behaving in an ethical manner. And out of this firestorm of ill behavior came the muckrakers, which the book talks about as being sort of renegade journalists who started exposing factory conditions and how the corruption behind corporate America. And I think if you look over the last few years, the role of MSNBC and CNN and other news organizations in terms of the big three automakers and other big-time companies that have been, sort of slaughtered in the media, the muckrakers never went away. Well, with the emergence of the muckrakers and getting this negative publicity and seeing the effect it had, organizations such as Rockefeller and big-time people like that started to see the importance of changing behavior and gaining the public's respect. So it was because of this negative push by muckrakers that companies and organizations started to be more concerned about their public image and started looking at hiring people who would serve in the role of public relations. The real father of public relations that the book talks about on page 29 is Ivy Lee, who's considered to be the real father of modern public relations. Like a lot of PR people, he came out of journalism. He was a Wall Street reporter. And you see that in this day and age that a lot of people practicing PR actually used to serve as journalists and came out of the newspaper industry to go to move on to what some journalists laughingly describe as the dark side, but I think it tends to come with better pay and has a lot of great attributes to it that journalism doesn't. So Ivy Lee is someone you want to pay attention to in the textbook. His name will come up later, probably in a quiz. I'm not making any promises there. As will some of the other names that come forward, going into World War II with the Creel Commission and some of the different agencies that started to develop to handle information on the war and to really enhance the way that the general public was being communicated to, and to get them to understand and respect and believe some of the different efforts that were taking place. Also started to see during this time public relations being recognized as a skill to be learned. And Edward Bernays, that's another name you want to keep in mind. Edward Bernays really pioneered public relations being taught in the classroom at the university setting, and really started to develop some standards for it. Guys like Ivy Lee and Edward Bernays kind of made up for some of the damage done with the credibility of the craft that folks such as P.T. Barnum did. So be sure to read up on Edward Bernays as well as Ivy Lee. And then touching upon what I mentioned in the beginning, there's the 5 different areas that really contributed to the growth of public relations: growth of large institutions, to the growing power of global media, and democracy. All of these things tied together, and yes, even separately, really help push public relations to the forefront. So be sure to read those 5 different areas that kind of touches upon ways that the textbook author sees public relations as having grown. Of course, the last word in the book is always a good one to read to get kind of a basic summary. And the case study for this one, I talked about last chapter, the Martha Stewart's a good one. I actually like this one too, about the big Tylenol scare that some of you my age might remember. So it's a great textbook example, a case study of how an organization can recover from a crisis. And you'll see those 3, that trifecta there, being at the forefront, being ethical, being credible, and being trustworthy. So you might want to even take a look at that case study as well. So that closes up chapter 2, and hope you found it to be a good read, and we'll see you on the next chapter.